Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X researcher and professional physicist. And today I'd like to bring to you another one of my articles. This one is entitled California Population Attacked with Fires. Now, fires have been burning in California, sometimes out of control, for some weeks now. Buildings have been going up in flames, and yet often trees right next to the buildings do not catch fire. And a story run by the Washington Post on December 10, 2017 talked of an old farmhouse burning down and that yet a stack of firewood inside the building had been left untouched. This seems to me to indicate that these fires are the result of weapons being used to burn down whole neighborhoods. These weapons seem to be electromagnetic in nature, as multiple beams of blue light have been seen around the time of these fires erupting, as shown below. So here are some images of these beams of light that seem to come from the sky. They either come from planes or they come from orbiting platforms, but what we are seeing are what seems to be laser beams. Now, the appearance of these beams of light in areas that are seeing fires erupting indicate that directed energy weapons, or DEWs, are being used to incinerate buildings, vehicles, and neighborhoods. And this also explains why some materials such as steel is burning whilst wood is not. And the reason is that the light beam can be produced at different frequencies, which are resonant frequencies for different materials. And when a material is hit by light at the correct resonant frequency for that material, the light superheats the atoms and molecules in that material. In other words, the atoms and molecules start vibrating faster and faster to the point that the material ignites. And as more energy is driven into it by the beam continuing to deliver energy into it, the material reaches such temperatures that it vaporizes. This is why houses and sometimes trees seem to go up in flames from the interior, and also why certain materials go up in flames while other materials right next to it do not. And in the cases where these materials are going up in flames from the inside, this seems to be well, it tells me that probably a microwave type of energy is being used. And it's delivering heat to that specific target material. Normal temperatures reached in normal house fires about 1700 Fahrenheit, but steel melts at 2750 Fahrenheit. And what we see in these fires is we actually can see that steel, molten steel, well, there were steel, the fire was so hot that it led to the steel melting. And this means that this fire burned at 2750 degrees Fahrenheit, which is simply not possible if it was a normal house fire. So that's over 1000 degrees hotter. So again, this suggests that weapons are being used to destroy buildings and vehicles. Now, it is well known that microwave food gets heated from the inside. And the reason why this happened is because microwaves can penetrate the whole material. So all the molecules in the material gets energy delivered to them. And all the atoms in the material start vibrating faster, or in other words, they start getting hotter. Because an object's temperature is as a result of how much atoms or molecules in the material vibrate. So the whole material is impacted by, but the outside molecules that are in contact with air can dissipate the temperature more easily because they pass it on to the air. So they transfer their energy to air molecules, whilst the internal molecules inside the material are not able to dissipate that heat, so they heat up faster. Now, as we can see, this tree is shown burning from the inside, which means that first of all, the appropriate frequency was used to cause the molecules in the wood to resonate, that is, vibrate very fast, so at the right frequency for wood molecules, and also that it is a type of weapon that led to the internal molecules to heat up much faster than the outside ones. And of course we know that this is not natural, because in natural forest fires the fires pass from tree to tree and the trees start burning on the outside first. The outside of the material burns first, and then it burns towards the inside. So we can see that this is not a natural fire. Now, the weapons used to start the California fires are most likely mounted on aircraft, as shown below. They could be mounted on satellites as well. But we can see some of these mounted on airplanes. These are directed energy weapons, and as you can see, this directed energy weapon gives rise to these blue beams, and this is exactly some of the beams seen during these fires were blue as well. As you can see, there are two beams, and I think that if the beams intersect, then the power delivered by the weapon is much greater. Now, these weapons can be mounted on different platforms, like, as I said, they could be on satellites, they could also be on missile ships and vehicles, so they could be in vans. And some directed energy weapons are suitcase-sized, and some are so small that they look like portable radios. And the way these weapons work, well, it's based on the fact that whenever a charged particle is accelerated, radiation or photons are emitted. So this is what's illustrated here. Whenever a charged particle, for example, a particle that spirals along a magnetic field line, it's being accelerated because its direction of motion is continuously changing. That causes an acceleration, therefore the emission of radiation, radio waves. And now this means that any material at a temperature above 0 Kelvin will naturally give off radiation, because the atoms in that material will be vibrating, and then the charged particles inside each atom, because we need charged particles to be accelerated as the atom vibrates, and this means that these particles will be giving off a radiation of photons. So any object at a temperature above 0 Kelvin will at least give off some radiation. And if the object's temperature is below 1500 Kelvin, then the only radiation it will give off is usually infrared or low energy infrared radiation. But at higher temperatures, say 2000, 2500 Kelvin, then it will start giving off higher energy radiation, such as visible light radiation. Now, radiation can be produced by antennas. This is the way radio waves are emitted, and antennas can give off radiation in different frequencies, but they do this by causing electrons inside the antenna to oscillate, and then that results in the giving off of radiation. And this radiation will have a frequency which is associated to the frequency of oscillation of the electrons. Now, lasers produce single frequency coherent, that is, in phase. So beams that are in phase are when all the beams, all the waves making up the beams are at a maximum, or they all at a minimum at the same time. And this greatly amplifies the intensity of the light. These lasers can be generated through several methods, but I believe that the method that seems to result in the scalability which these weapons seem to require, that is, they need to operate at different destructive levels depending on the required outcome. And so the way that I think these laser weapons is through the use of free electrons, and so they are called free electron lasers. And then the control of the speed to which electrons are accelerated leads to the emission of laser beams of different frequencies. So that's what will be required, different frequencies, because you need a different frequency for each material that you want to you want the resonant frequency for different materials, and of course so you need to be able to emit lasers with different frequencies. Now this is how a free electron laser operates. You start off with a gun. So this is a source of electrons. The electrons then are accelerated by high potential difference. They then go into the undulator magnet, which is made up of several magnets, which causes the electrons to follow this path, which is an oscillating path. And that means that they then come out, because they are oscillating, they are therefore accelerated. And if they are accelerating, the electrons or charged particles, that means that radiation will be given off. But now these electrons are accelerated to very high speeds, so they are Doppler shifted, which means that their high velocity leads to the frequency of the radiation to be much higher than the initial frequency of the frequency of the oscillation itself. And but they are weak initially, and that is because electrons are traveling in an incoherent manner and leads to incoherent light emission. And that is because the electrons initially are spread out over a scale which is greater than the wavelength. So they spread out in all over the place. And that means that we only get a few of the light waves that are in phase with each other. We see two here. The rest will not be in phase. But as the electrons, most of these devices recycle the electrons. So the electrons go back into the gun, and they are accelerated, and they go through another pass. And with each pass, the electrons start bunching more and more, so that eventually they end up, most of the electrons will be at the maximum of the waves, and there will be just about none at the minimum. And this means that they become coherent, and therefore more and more of the light waves are coherent as well. And this leads to an increase in the intensity of the light, to the point that it is 10 to 100 million times greater than the initial spontaneous emission. And so this leads to a very strong laser being produced. Now, as I said before, DEWs can operate at different energy scales. So they have the ability to vaporize any material, and they can operate at lower scales where they simply interfere with the functioning of a human being. And at these low energy scales, they may then cause tiredness, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pains, convulsions, epileptic seizures, temporary paralysis, vibration of internal organs, cooking of internal organs, cataracts, burning sensations, control heating of the whole body to produce hypothermia or fever, headaches, and loss of short-term memory. Now, the use of chemtrails also seems to play a part in the attack on the California population, as the filling of the atmosphere with metallic nanoparticles makes it more conductive, which increases the effectiveness of the directed energy weapons. In addition, there is some evidence that the use of chemtrails can be used to heat the atmosphere and keep water vapor or clouds from coming ashore from the Pacific Ocean. and therefore into California, and thus making the region extremely hot and dry. In addition, aluminum powder, when ignited, explodes and burns at a very high temperature. So the presence of aluminum powder on buildings will facilitate the spread of fires in certain instances. In conclusion, the fires burning in California appear to be a well thought out attack on the population of the region and not a natural disaster. This is Dr. Claudia Albers, Planet X physicist. Thank you for watching.